Hello and welcome to a reading of our roleplay of Doom. If you're looking for the first couple of posts, it's the intro posts. They're in my video blog titled Things 03. Now we get started. It's your turn.
Wait, where am I? Oh, by the time Yuri and Matt came into dinner, Keegan and Corin had already been there for a good 5 minutes. Compared to the noise outside, the silence inside the dining room, if you could call it that, was still as the grave. Corin seemed to be adamantly reading some sort of book on warp tunnels or something. The seamed part came in when it was obvious his eyes had been stuck on the same spot of the page for at least 2 minutes. Keegan, on the other hand, was alternately glaring at the wall or turning to make funny faces at their captain. As the only two members walked in, Keegan was in the middle of pulling the skin down under one eye with one hand while simultaneously spitting out his tongue and making rude gestures with the other. Ah, the smell of stale air in the morning. Okay, so it was more like evening, though really there was no such thing as day, night, and deep space. Anyways, when Keegan saw them walk in, he stopped what he was doing and turned his attention to the two newcomers, mainly their navigator. What's his name again? Oh yeah, Matt. You have a little chat with Kirk? Keegan didn't like using Rose's first name. On your way in? He asked slightly, snickering at the boy's pale face. His crystal blue eyes did a bored sweep over Yuri before returning to Matt, curious at the other's response. Unconsciously, his hand went up to ruffle his golden-tipped hair, something he did whenever he was trying to show off or was nervous. It was hard to tell which one of these two he was now, sitting there slumped in his chair with his chin resting on his hand, grinning at Matt. Corin glanced up at the three before glancing at the door to the kitchen with a, "Oh hell, what's taking so damn long?"
Oh, you don't want to know, bro. Corin. Matt was a clumsy bugger, from what everyone knew, especially with Ro or Keegan in the room. So after attempting to bow at the captain, he chaotically almost fell out of his chair before even sitting on it, in which Keegan was to blame for talking to the poor, twitching, scruffy little mathematician. How dare he? Nevertheless, the young'un made it relatively safely into his seat and held back any looks he might shoot at the weapons specialist for the sake of hiding his eyes. He has this. Meanwhile, Yuri sniffed in a reprimanding fashion at Corin's impatience, seeming about to open his mouth. Apparently, the little mutt-blood, as Ro liked to taunt him by, wasn't exactly the same old buddy old pal with Corin for some reason or another. Matt couldn't guess. Well, Matt was talking at the moment, so it was likely the other half of his brain wasn't thinking about the interrelation havoc that he had walked into on the ship. "Did you plan this, or do you just like to screw with the man with the gun collection?" he asked, out loud, looking directly at the captain. Now this was quite the surprise, the scruffy little guy actually having a semblance of sassing Corin. It hadn't happened yet. Ro would make a joke about him growing balls, but he was currently incapacitated from being in the kitchen due to the fact Grace was a bitch to get off of skin. Sparsely populated eyebrows, tinted pale red, raised in interest and amusement and a bit of surprise, though Yuri held back any of his own comments on the matter. Matt didn't seem to regret his words, neither did he seem to find them all too strongly placed.
Keegan made a slight noise at Matt's total and obvious cold shoulder. How dare that little punk not reply to him? Crossing his arms over his chest and sprouting a scowl, he made a point of staring at the kitchen door and didn't even glance over when Matt threw some lip at the captain. Corin, on the other hand, tossed Yuri a strange look that could have said, "Lay off, what now, what did I do, get over it," or any other odd statements. I was like the same thing. With his knitted eyebrows and daunting white silver eyes, it was hard to read the man. After that, he fixated his gaze on Matt, who seemed to be upset over Rose's tantrum. No one else seemed to have noticed it happened. Keeping his cool eyes on the navigator, he said without a trace of emotion that he didn't allow anyone screwing with anyone on the ship, at which Keegan coughed out a jibe similar to, "unless you're the one screwing them," and that if the mechanic had a problem, he could talk to him personally about it. He seemed to be ready to add something else to that, but it was then that Elaine walked in. 5'10", skinny as hell, and decked out in shiny black slacks, a white blouse, and a bright pink apron with frills and pictures of dancing tofu cartoons on the front. Elaine was, as per usual, a sight to behold. "All right, ladies," he gasped out as he came through the kitchen door, holding a huge cooking pot. Setting it down in the middle of the table, he dished out 6 bowls and spoons and then placed a ladle on the edge of the pot. In unison, the 4 other occupants of the room leaned forward to see what was the meal for the night. Egg noodles, dried seaweed, artificial chicken, tofu bits, and oh yes, more egg noodles, Elaine announced, voice sounding a bit strained. A piece of jet black hair had slipped from its holder and was hanging in his eye. Elaine swooped the strand to the right side of his face and secured it with a bright, sparkling green hair clip. Then he stood back to judge the others' reaction to the food. If at least 2 of them started the meal without a word of complaint, it would be a successful night indeed.
God, it's never a successful night with him.
I know, poor thing.
Except for the pancakes, and that was a horrible morning.
Yeah, it was a horrible morning.
When people got beat up and Yuri. Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay. Yuri gave the equivalent of a shrug back to Corin. Facial expression was, but gave a vague indication that this did seem to happen rather regularly. That and they all knew a pissy row was not a good thing if you want your mechanic to actually fix things rather than throw wrenches at your head. Despite the initial visual lack of regret, Matt had to hold back a bit of a flinch when Corin replied, avoiding the other eyes for more reasons than just hiding his own. In his head, he was already starting to think up his response, which he normally would never say at all or even think of saying, when Elaine came to save the day. Well, not really. His reaction to the food was a bit listless, as was his reaction to Elaine's manner, which he had gotten used to for the most part. His eyes searched the pot and then the bowls of food. There was a lot of carbs and protein, and he reminded himself to dash to the kitchen later for some form of vitamin C. Meanwhile, Yuri shuddered at the thought of dried seaweed, trying to hold back any facial expressions of disgust. He has no facial expressions. Oh, he could handle bad artificial food and tofu. Tofu wasn't absolutely horrible in his books, but seaweed? Where the hell did Elaine even get seaweed? Considering the last few places they had stopped at, the thoughts were a bit repelling. He sniffed at the steam rising from the food before looking to Elaine and waiting his reaction to their reactions.
Though the other 2 did their best to accept the meal, Keegan didn't even try. You've got to be fucking kidding me, fruit ball. Seaweed? Did you fish it out of the pond at our last stop or what? Getting to his feet abruptly, he banged against the table, causing it to tilt slightly and almost spilled the soup all over Corin. Hey, yelped Elaine, grasping at the pot before it could flip over. No, I bought it at a genuine shop for fine cuisine for the average traveler. Hey, where are you going? He chased after Keegan as the weapons man pushed past him on his way to the kitchen. As he walked, he said over his shoulder, I'm going to dig around in those cupboards until I find something edible. Oh, no, you don't. Elaine was on him in a second, jumping on the taller man's back and trying to stop him from going through the doors. There was a lot of cussing coming from Keegan now, and the 2 of them crashed about the room for a few minutes as Elaine tried to get Keegan to sit back down, and Keegan tried to get the flaming fruitcake off his back. Meanwhile, Corin had spooned a helping of this dish into his bowl and was now eating it. He did pretty good until he got a piece of seaweed into his mouth, at which point his face contorted into a grimace and his spoon hit the bowl with a splat. The other 2 had stopped long enough to gauge his reaction, and as Corin stood up to excuse himself, Elaine dropped off of Keegan and stomped to the table. Fine! You can all go hungry tonight, he shouted at them, taking the pot and disappearing into the kitchen. At which point, Ro finally arrived.
He's such a fruit.
I know.
Oh, we don't have that much time left. Okay.